Welcome, everyone. I'm glad you're here. For the next hour, we're going to do a section on the HUBzero platform for scientific collaboration. So my name is Michael McLennan. I'm the director and the software architect for the HUBzero platform here at Purdue. And what I want to do is start with kind of a brief 15-minute overview just to show you, those of you who have never heard of this before, kind of wondering what it is. I wanted to explain what HUBzero is all about very briefly. And then I was going to invite each of my colleagues up on stage to talk about their particular project for about 7 minutes or so, just to get a good overview. Am I losing it? So I wanted to give them a chance to give an overview of their particular projects so that you can hear about how they're using HUBzero for each of these different projects. NanoHub, Mark Lundstrom will talk about the NanoHub, Joe Pekny will talk about the Cancer Care Engineering Hub, and Rudy Eigenmann will talk about the NICE project. So with that, let me jump in and give you a little bit of an overview. This all started with the development of the NanoHub site. The official project kicked off. It's an NSF project in 2002. And we started building a site that we wanted to become a national resource for nanotechnology information. And after a few years of doing that, people started coming to us and saying, hey, we want one of those hub things for our project. So in 2007, we took the guts of the NanoHub site and scraped it out and made it into a generic software package that didn't have hard-coded NanoHub. And we used that to create a few hubs to get going. In 2008, the first few hubs came online, including Indiana CTSI, which is a joint project with Indiana University, and PharmaHub, which Rex Reklitis headed for pharmaceutical engineering, Thermal Hub, Tim Fisher, and Global Hub, Dan Herleman. And the next year, we brought a few more hubs online, and this past year, things have just exploded. We also did an open source release of HUBzero, and so now we're starting to see hubs pop up at other universities too. So today, there are about 30 hubs in existence. About 25 of those are hosted here at Purdue, and there are about 6 other hubs, a couple at IU, a couple at Clemson, and a couple that people have done out in the wild using the open source release as well. Each of these hubs basically has its own funding stream, its own project. They're all run separately, typically have their own group of users. Sometimes there's overlap between the user base, sometimes not, many times not. And some of these hubs are even funded by outside institutions. We've started doing hubs for the Environmental Protection Agency, for a couple of SUNY schools through the NISTAR funding, and Rice University. So basically, hubs are us. We've got hubs are us business going on, and if people have a research project and they need a hub, we can do it. Now, to explain what the hub is all about, the best way for me to explain it really is by showing it to you. So what I want to do is kind of kick off this movie and walk you through how it works. All right, so what you're seeing here is the NanoHub site. It's a website. You can think of it as a digital library of content. And like a lot of other Web 2.0 sites, we use tags to categorize the content. So if you're interested in quantum dots, you can choose that tag, and you can find all the stuff on NanoHub that's characterized as associated with quantum dots. For example, here's a lecture by Tim Sands on nanotubes and nanowires. And you can see it's Tim Sands, Purdue University. There's a little abstract, just like a publication. But this is an online presentation. It's a seminar that you can watch. And actually, if I had the volume up, you could hear Tim speaking right now. But you can also flip through the talk. You can also open up the table of contents, and you can search. So for example, we were interested in quantum dots. So we can search and find exactly those slides. This talk was produced with Adobe Presenter, but we have lots of others that are just MP4 files or Camtasia or what have you. The point is the hub is a way of publishing those kinds of resources and making them available. If we keep searching now on quantum dots and look at some of the other results, there are a lot of things related to quantum dots. I might be interested in just the tools. So I can choose tools and kind of filter down, and you can see that there are 4 tools that are tagged with quantum dots here on NanoHub. There's the Quantum Dot Lab, which I actually worked on with my colleague Gerhard Klimek. And again, this is the Quantum Dot Lab. You can see what it's all about. If you want to run this tool, you just click the button Launch Tool. This is really where HUBzero takes off compared to a lot of other systems. You do need to have an account, but it's kind of like signing up for Gmail. It just takes about 5 minutes. And once you get your username and password, you can log in, and it'll fire up a live tool session. Looks like it's right in your browser, kind of like a mortgage calculator, and you can start messing around with the Quantum Dot Lab and actually do simulation. And in order to do this, very low overhead. You didn't have to write an allocation proposal. You didn't have to use my proxy. You just kind of point and click. So I can choose, for example, a dome-shaped quantum dot. I can set the z-axis, the z size, to 4 nanometers. I could change the parameters of the light source that I'm going to shine at this quantum dot. And then when I'm ready to run, I click Simulate. And this goes off and runs a code, Gerhardt's NeMo code, on Purdue resources or elsewhere. And that was one tool. There are 180 tools like this on NanoHub. This is a carbon nanotube simulator. This one is another carbon nanotube simulator, but this simulates the phonon spectrum. So you get kind of the heat transfer functions. This is a band structure lab. It shows you, in this case, gallium arsenide semiconductor lattice. You can kind of explore that and see the crystallographic planes, and then you can pull up the bulk band structure, and this is the computed band structure, including things like the effects of strain and so forth. Here's a nanowire simulator. You can put in the parameters of the geometry, the channel size, the materials, the doping, the kind of simulation you want to do, even the band structure again, and then you click a button to run it. When you click the button to run it, if you look closely, it says this particular tool is going to take about 4 hours. It's using like 253 processors off on coats. So you can actually launch very complicated, compute-intensive simulations using the Hub. And then we take all of that and we tie it all together with a lot of social networking and digital library functions. For example, a lot of people cite these tools, so we give citation instructions and digital object identifiers. And in fact, this particular tool has 14 citations in academic literature. If you click on that link, you can see all these papers. These papers are citing this tool, saying they used it as part of their research. We also keep a lot of web analytics, so you can see who's been using a tool. 2,696 users of this tool, 24,000 simulation runs in the last 12 months. And you can drill down and click on that statistic, and you can get more detailed information about where these users are coming from, how they've grown over time, whether they're educational or industrial users, and so forth. There are also, all those users tend to have questions about the tool, so we track that as well. There are 14 questions associated with this tool, many of them answered. For example, here's a question about how to set the E dimension for a pyramidal or spherical quantum dot, and you can see it has an answer, and so forth. So this is a way of kind of connecting people, not just using tools, but helping one another. You can review the tools on a Hub, and just like you'd review videos on Netflix. It's a 5-star review with some comments, and people can give thumbs up or thumbs down to your review. We also have a way of gathering ideas. We call them a wish list. So if you wish this tool had a feature that it doesn't right now, you can put that in, propose that as a wish, and people can vote that up or down, thumbs up or thumbs down. You can also bid points. I'll give 500 points to anybody who can add this feature to my particular tool. And every tool has that. We also add in ways of sharing. So if you really like this tool, you can put it out on Facebook or Twitter and kind of let the world know about it. So you can think of it in some sense as kind of an app store for the science. You're putting all of these applications online, publishing them in this venue, and connecting them together with the social networking things so that people can make good use of them. All right. So that's what a Hub is all about. A Hub is all about building a site just like this for your particular scientific community. So each of those communities I showed you before works like this, but of course has its own content and its own people involved. So if I look again at NanoHub and how it's grown over the years, it's been online for a long time now, since 2002, and it's kind of grown steadily, doubling every 18 months or so. We're at about 160,000 users now from 172 countries worldwide, and it just keeps growing. Those are, by the way, real users. Those are people who are watching the videos, downloading podcasts, running the tools, and so forth. If you count the people that just kind of bop in from Google and take a look at the site, those are visitors. We got about 350,000 visitors of the site. So actually, our core audience relative to the visitors is also pretty big, and our bounce rate's pretty low. So how are people using this? Well, one way is in education. Last year alone, there were 116 classes at 97 institutions that were using NanoHub in particular as part of their curricula. And you could imagine, for example, being a professor, instead of Xeroxing things out of the textbook the night before, you just kind of stumble into class and pop up band structure lab and fire it up. And if a student asks about indium arsenide versus gallium arsenide, you can run that and show them how it works. So one way is just by demonstrating these things in class. Another way is by doing homework assignments or also assigning projects, like design projects, to students and having them use the tools to complete the project. And you can see the use in class has grown as we've gotten more and more content online, and also the use at all the top 50 engineering schools has really taken off as well. Another way that people use the hubs is in research. And again, using NanoHub as an example, we've tracked down 575 citations in academic literature that are talking about NanoHub and the resources on NanoHub. Now, some of those, the green dots, are talking about NanoHub as an example of cyber infrastructure, talking more about the HUBzero side of things. So those are the green dots. The blue dots are talking about using NanoHub in class as an educational tool. But you can see the vast majority, 80%, of them are red dots, and the red dots are all talking about research. Papers like this, if you zoomed in on those dots, you would see, for example, an experimentalist in France that was talking about using a tool on NanoHub because she was trying to measure, she was measuring thin films in the lab, and she was reverse engineering the thickness of the thin films based on their electrical characteristics by comparing against the computations on NanoHub. So she was using the NanoHub tool as a theoretical tool in her experimental research. There was also a device physicist in Italy that was downloading an open source tool on NanoHub and adding to the models and then benchmarking his code and his physics against the published tool. So those are the kinds of applications that people are doing in the red dots, and that's exactly the kind of research that we want to see. Not just talking about NanoHub, but actually using it. And again, NanoHub is one example of this. There are lots of other hubs out there, and they all have growing user communities. So, for example, Global Hub now is at 32,000 users, Pharma Hub almost 10,000 users, and so forth. So the communities are seemingly doing quite well and growing for all these hubs. One of the reasons, I think, is that sort of the academic payback that you get. You know, if you're a faculty member, you want to have citations, right? And so you publish papers and you try to get citations. You want people to know about your work. The hub is another way of publishing, and it helps you track your work in the same way that you track citations. It not only links to the citations, as I was showing you before, you know, if you can sort of track citations against hub resources, but we have all the web analytics. If you go to my profile on NanoHub, for example, there's a little part in the corner that shows some statistics, and you can click on that and drill down, and it will show you these are the resources that I've published on NanoHub, and it'll show you exactly how many thousand users have hit my resources. I have about 2,600 users in the last 12 months. I think there's about 9,500 users over all time. And this is exactly the kind of information that you can put in the proposals that you write to NSF. When NSF is asking about your broader impacts, I've got 9,500 people on my broader impacts. So you can really make a case for the tools that you publish and why you need additional funding to reach a larger audience. I wanted to mention, if you're interested now in HUBzero, I hope you are, we have an event coming up called HUBbub 2011, April 5th and 6th in Indianapolis, Indiana. So come join us in Indianapolis. We're going to have a 2-day workshop. Last year we had about 120 people there, and we have sort of 3 tutorial tracks. We have some talks in the morning, and in the afternoon we have tracks planned this year for how hubs are used in various science projects. You're going to get a little flavor of that right now. And also about how you manage a hub and actually use it, improve users, and what do you do about the people that are bad users, bad apples, and all of that. So all of those issues, real-world issues come up. And also creating and publishing scientific tools. If you had a MATLAB code or a Fortran program that you wanted to bring online, we can show you exactly how to do that. And in general, if you're interested in more information about HUBzero, be sure to check out HUBzero.org. That's got all the information about the package and all the statistics. So now I want to start to invite the various presenters up, one at a time, starting with Mark Lundstrom, and he can give you a brief overview about the NanoHub. Mark is the Don and Carol Cyphris Distinguished Professor of Electrical and Computer Engineering. He's also the Executive Director of the Network for Computational Nanotechnology, which is the organization that built NanoHub.org and got it started. If there's somebody to blame for this, I think it's Mark, because he dragged me into all of this. So he is indeed the hubbiest hub guy of all.
Thanks for the invitation to be up here. I don't know if I can live up to that intro, and I won't even try. But Michael said a few words about NanoHub, and let me try not to be repetitive, but I'll just say a few words about where this all came from. One of the things I want to indicate is that although you've been talking a lot about computing, it surprised us a little bit. NanoHub is really about a lot more than just computing. So a little history. It all started in 1994. Some of you have heard me tell this story before. It was a project that we thought would keep a graduate student busy for a semester. And it turned out to last much longer. And really, it led to a project called PUNCH, Purdue University Network Computing Hubs. And the idea was if you had a simulation tool and you were a computational scientist, and you either wanted to facilitate its use in your own classroom or you wanted to collaborate with a collaborator somewhere and make it easy for your collaborator to run the tool and feed their data in, they were usually an experimentalist, how could we do that in an easy way? So we came up with this. It was really cool at the time, and people were very impressed when we went out and talked about it. It was all forms-based. You'd install a tool as is, give it a little bit of information about what kind of inputs it expected and what kind of outputs it produced. Fill in a form, submit a job, and push a button. Keep pushing it to see whether it was done. When it was done, you'd see some files in your output directory, GIF files or whatever. You could pick them up, and they were static files, and you could have a look at them. And it was really neat. Anytime I went out and talked about it, people got excited and thought this was cool. Jose Fortes, my colleague, who was a computer engineer, and working with people like Rudy Eigenmann, they thought that there were some interesting questions here regarding networks of the future and cyber infrastructure, although we didn't use that word at that time. So we got together and I said, okay, it's really nice that you guys can work in this and maybe do some research and write some papers, but my own interest is in simply how do I further the work of my group? How do I make tighter connections with my collaborators? How do I make use of what I do in the classroom? And if this helps me do that, then we can keep the whole program alive. And we did. It took a little while to find the funding, and we were always scraping by for a while. And it eventually led in 2002 to an opportunity to move it up to a bigger scale, and that was NCN and NanoHub. So this is an NSF-funded activity. It's was intended to support the Nanotechnology initiative, which was new at that time. And it had a two-part mission. Part of the mission was research, but the bigger part of the mission was infrastructure to support the community. And our prime part of our mission was to connect people who do computation, simulation, and theory with people who do experiments and need computation to analyze their experiments. And we also were trying to promote cross-disciplinary education, make use of these tools in the classroom and try to make that easier and to disseminate what we were doing. That led to the NanoHub, and Michael has shown you about that. The signature service was simulation at your fingertips. So it was the ability to go to the website and run a simulation without downloading anything. And we also sort of envisioned that we would need some training materials to help people use those tools. We thought a little bit about education, but not a lot, and some tools to help teams collaborate together. Okay, so as we got started, the first thing we did was move Punch out of the corner of my lab in the EE building, and we moved it over to ITaP and got it going. And initially I thought, well, that'll be okay for a few years. And then we went out and we hired a couple of individuals, Gerhard Klimek and then Michael McLennan, and they took a look at Punch and they said, well, this is really neat for its time, but it just needs to be, we need something new. So we launched into building what eventually became HUBzero. But we started monitoring our usage numbers, and you can see here, for a while we had almost 1,000 people a year using it, and then over years it dipped down a little bit while we were scrounging for funding, and then we got going with NCN, and we started looking at this task of building the IT platform, the cyber infrastructure, and we thought, what can we do for the community? It's going to take a couple of years at least. What can we do in the meantime? And we changed our motto at that time from online simulation to online simulation and more. So we started going to some of the people that were involved in this who were taking what they were learning when they were developing simulations and bringing it into the classroom, and we started posting courses and lectures and seminars and tutorials, and the usage numbers picked up right away. Now, this is really very much in the line of what computation is all about. Richard Hamming is a very famous computer scientist, one of the most famous. And he has this quote, "The purpose of computing is insight, not numbers." And his point was that very often the most important thing that comes out of developing a computer simulation is what you learned in the process of writing the code and running it and using it. And if you can share that with others, that's very important. And that's what we started doing. And we basically started disseminating this knowledge. And this is a core part of the academic mission, disseminating knowledge. If you go back to the history of the transistor, people worked very hard with figuring out how to do this. William Shockley wrote papers, and that wasn't enough, so he wrote the first textbook in the field, and that wasn't enough. So Bell Labs held workshops and invited people in and trained them how to use transistors. And it really took off when a group of educators developed a set of paperback books. And they had great impact because suddenly people for the first time could learn this on their own or teach it in the classroom, and that really ignited the semiconductor revolution. Of course, we don't need to disseminate paperback books, so we now have many examples like this. Vlad Shileyev is a faculty member here at Purdue that's doing really pioneering work in nanophotonics. Vlad put a course on called nanophotonics, and his group also develops tools, and he has some simulation tools that complement the coursework. But initially, he did that just sort of as a favor. We said, Vlad, do you mind if we videotape it? We think some people might be interested in looking at this. And then he started looking at the numbers. He's got almost 20,000 people that have viewed this course because it's a brand new field. There are no textbooks. There's a hunger for material like this. He goes anywhere in the world, and people ask him detailed questions about lecture such and such. And once he started hearing these numbers and the feedback, it really got him excited about participating. Okay, so now with Michael's team, we've built Rapture. So that same simulation, you actually saw it in his movie. You could easily put a nice interface on it. Very little work for the researcher. The data is live. You can change the axes. You can visualize the nanotube. You can roll around. It looks like it's running in your desktop, and it really had tremendous impact on what we've done. And as Michael mentioned, we have more than 180 tools. So we have lots of examples now. This is another one. We have a virtual atomic force microscope that's online. And the interesting thing about this is it has now every manufacturer of atomic force microscopes in the country uses this tool for training. And that's led to a larger research program where they're going to couple this with a molecular dynamics simulation and actually produce a virtual atomic force microscope where you'll do large-scale molecular dynamics simulations to simulate a physical structure, and then you'll simulate the measurement of that same structure. So lots of interesting things going on. They're developing a very unique course on the principles of atomic force microscopy that's attracting a lot of interest too. So faculty are really finding that there's a lot of use for this, and I'm almost done. So what's it all about? We now make use of the HUBzero IT platform, and it's really wonderful to see that other people are using it too. When we first started this, it was very much from the point of view of the PI. How can this help us do our work better? I really didn't think a lot about the audience out there. But we've developed a very large audience out there of students, professionals, working engineers, faculty, and the usage numbers are growing, so we seem to be doing something useful for the community. The other community, though, are the people underneath who are developing this content and the tools, the faculty and the graduate students and the research groups and the research centers. And what we provide for them is a platform to disseminate their work so that it can have much more impact, tools to help them collaborate. Most of our projects these days are dispersed, and tools to help them do online simulation and share data with their colleagues. So I think we've been able to demonstrate that this technology how effective it can be in collaboration, really effective in dissemination, and very effective in learning. And the result has been a platform that we can share with others, and it's really wonderful to see these other success stories as well. So one of the things that we're thinking about now is, first of all, how can we serve the growing number of people who come to the site? And here we rely on the HUBzero team. They have a very good understanding of what's going on these days with Web 2.0 and what users need. We have this other community underneath it all that produces all this content and uses it. And those are faculty who are trying to get funding and get their work done and have impact. And the final question, I don't know if you talked about it, how do you sustain this? As Michael mentioned, each one of these hubs has their own independent funding stream, and sometimes it can be a challenge to develop that independent funding stream.
Okay, so thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. The Hub technology has been a very important part of what we've done. The Cancer Care Engineering Project really is a collaboration between three very different communities. We've got the medical community. Our partners are mostly at IU School of Medicine, but we've also done some work with MD Anderson Center. There's an engineering community, which I'm a representative of, and this is a group that's maybe new to some parts of the healthcare game, especially to the way we're approaching the cancer care system. And then the third community is sort of represented by Marietta Harrison. These are the three PIs on the project. Marietta represents the large scientific community that does research in the cancer area. And so you've got the frontline clinician, you've got folks who are interested in the engineering aspects and how they can be brought to bear, and then you've got Marietta in the research community. Now, the reason why I want to tell you that there's three very different communities is that without the hub, it would be very hard to have these communities interact on a routine basis. Normally, these communities are far apart. Engineers are very far apart from some of the clinical work and some of the scientific work. And even cancer is such a complex disease, and there's so many different research strategies, it's hard to bring together each community, much less all three communities. And the hub has been very important to do that. So there's a social networking part, which I've heard mentioned a few times. And I would say Cancer Care Engineering Hub, that's one of the most important parts of what the hub's done, the hub technology's done for the Cancer Care Engineering Project. Okay, so the goal of the Cancer Care Engineering Project is to try to bind this research community together as tightly as possible and to bring them as close to the clinical problem as possible. In this area, as in many parts of research, not just the cancer area, you can spend 30 years or 35 years getting trained to do the work. And so you become a niche player, very specialized, very important part of a research community. But sometimes it's hard to have a really close feel for, in this case, the clinic, where patients are getting treated. So one of the things we're doing with the Cancer Care Engineering Project is to bring the clinical problems as close to the researchers as possible. Also to bind this community together to do much bigger science, more ambitious scientific efforts than these folks could do on their own. Okay, let me, and this particular project has over 70 physicians, caregivers, engineers, scientists, and staff that work on this project. It's funded by, I think, 4 or 5 pots of money. The military funds it. We get some NIH funding, NSF funding, and then foundation funding. So this is an independently funded effort, one of the things that Mike mentioned with this team. Just to give you an idea of some of the organizations that are involved, of course, Purdue, the Cancer Center, and the Discovery Park, the Oncological Science Center, IU School of Medicine, the IU Simon Cancer Center, the Reagan Street Institute is heavily involved. Notre Dame has joined the project in the last year and a half. They bring a certain specialty simulation niche and are helping us analyze some of our data, and they interact with us on the hub. MD Anderson has been involved in the project and actually formally joined with military funding this year. And then the Veterans Administration, particularly the Rudolf Hospital down in Indianapolis. And then the Walter Cancer Center has been another one of the sources of funding. Now, I'm mentioning these various entities and these various communities because I do want to emphasize for my talk the social networking part. Now, some of the things that we do with the cyber infrastructure, I mean, this is a 7-minute talk, but we've got a whole variety of tools. We have our own little collection of tools, not unlike what Mark has mentioned and Mike mentioned. We've got tools, probably the most important set of tools early on in the Cancer Care Engineering Hub was really a workflow tool. There were a set of tools associated with workflow. One of the major efforts in the Cancer Care Engineering Hub is to bring all this various measurement technology that's being researched together to take a look at blood and tissue and provide different tests for learning more about how the cancer functions in different kinds of people. So there's scientists, 3 or 4 research groups at Purdue. Fred Rainier's group does proteomics and glycoproteomics. Dan Raftery's group does tests on small molecules. Folks down at IU do different kinds of proteomics tests. So what happens out in the field is some of the nurse participants in the project collect blood or tissue in an IU clinic. Those samples then get an ID number They're logged into the hub, the cancer engineering hub. Then those samples are sent, and I call them digitized. They're sent through these various machines, which produce a huge amount of data, usually some kind of space, some kind of time shift, some kind of plot that gives you some molecular characterization. And as it goes through the various labs, either down at IU and then eventually to Purdue when the sample comes up here, we have a huge amount of information about all these samples. Then there's a whole set of tools which are used to take the dirty data, it's dirty coming out of these machines, clean it up, and then take that data further and put it inside certain kinds of models, and then use those models to interpret what's going on with that sample. And then we bring all these various tests together, and we can do sort of an integrated analysis based on all the best tests that are out in the cancer research community. Again, that's all made possible by the hub. Without the hub, this would be a much slower effort. I don't have a quantitative measure for how fast the hub makes this research process, but I would say at least an order of magnitude. Now, there are a variety of other tools. If you go in the Cancer Engineering Hub, you'll see simulation tools. You'll see tools which help predict how often someone should be tested for colorectal cancer based on all the data that we have from all our various constituents. We have various tools for handling samples. We also build all the patient data into the hub, and it's protected with a security system, and all this data can be only let out to people who have authorization from the PI and people who are allowed to have access to the data. The data is anonymized and well protected. Okay, last slide. This CCE Hub idea is catching on. I was invited to give a talk in New York to ITMIG. It was a bunch of physicians. It's the International Thymoma Working Group. Thymoma is a very rare cancer. It's a devastating cancer, as most cancers are. It's a cancer that's treated with drugs and surgery, but it's such a rare cancer that we don't understand it very well. So when ITMIG invited me together, they had heard about the hub. They wanted to put together a hub. They wanted to extend the Cancer Engineering Hub to study thymoma so that people from around the world could enter data about different thymoma patients. There are approximately 5,000 to 10,000 new thymoma cases a year. The idea is to have the entire thymoma community enter the radiological and data in from these patients and collect it so that it now, instead of being studied onesie, twosie around the world, or as a group every couple of years at a conference, it could be studied as a dynamic, ongoing problem. And the thinking will be that there'll be a rapid advance in the study of thymoma and hopefully the cure of thymoma by bringing this diffuse data from all over the world together. So, I don't think my animation's working real well. The idea here, and this is Ann Catlin is the PI on this project. Ann was called, after I gave the talk in New York, Ann was called to Yale for a 2-day working session. They laid out the specs for the thymoma version of the Cancer Engineering Hub, and the specs all call for putting together these worldwide pieces of the puzzle to go after this nasty cancer. So with that, I'll stop. That gives you a very different flavor than maybe the NanoHub, and maybe take some questions after the last talk.
So let me tell you what you should see, because you don't see it actually. So this is about a brief 7-minute talk about the hub that we're using for the Network for Earthquake Engineering Simulation, which is a large project involving 14 civil engineering labs, earthquake engineering labs. This graphic that you should see here should show you the US map and sort of where these 14 civil engineering labs are. We have a number, as you can expect, on the West Coast, because there are earthquakes, a few on the East Coast, and then a few sort of in the middle. And Purdue has become the headquarters of managing that organization. And as part of that management, we're using hub technology, and Mike did an excellent introduction, and you've seen 2 other examples of how that's being used. So NEES is another user of that technology. What is the goal of the management? Well, of course, on one hand, just manage civil engineering labs on the physical side, but on the IT side, what we have to do is, simply speaking, find ways of making the whole greater than the sum of its parts. And one way of doing that is to use that hub technology to, for example, collect all the data that is being produced when a civil engineer, for example, puts a building on a large shake table, shakes it puts a lot of sensor instruments that building, collects that data, and then puts it in a repository. Why would that be of use? Well, because then others who may not have access to that equipment could actually use the data and do research based on the data. And I understand that just actually in the next solicitation of research proposals that use that infrastructure, there's now a possibility of using not just the physical equipment to do new research, but actually use the data that we're providing in our hub to then do new civil engineering research based on, or maybe even computer science research based on it. So there's another empty slide. That basically should show you just the homepage of the NIS Hub. If you go to nis.org, you see one of these similar to many examples that you have seen. A hub that says Network for Earthquake Engineering, a simulation homepage, and you can activate many of the features that have been discussed in other presentations. Once you go into so one key aspect of the NIS Hub is, like I said, we collect that data, we present the data to the users, so you can go into what we call, or our civil engineering colleagues call it the NIS project warehouse. You can go into this warehouse and actually browse the various earthquake engineering research projects that have been done over the past few years. And the previous slide that was empty should have shown you one of these displays or views of how that looks as you go into this warehouse and see sort of a representative picture of the overall setup of such a civil engineering project, and then the various data elements, simple ones like the title, the description, what equipment is being used, what is the specimen, what is the underlying equipment like the shake table, or we have centrifuges, there is a tsunami wave lab as part of the network as well, or big reaction walls where civil engineers mount real hardware and put loads on a bridge that they build in a lab and so on. So you see that setup, and you can sort of browse the overall organization and structure of that project. Then where does hub technology really come in? Once you drill down and want to look at the actual data that is being stored, the data that was collected from these various sensors. Now what you can do is you pull up an actual viewer, and this is one of an example of such a viewer. We call it Indeed. That viewer does various things. It shows you sort of a specimen representation, but very important then is once you can look at various schematic displays of the specimen and the underlying structure. You could click on, you can see various sensors that the specimen is instrumented with. You can click on various sensors, and then you can actually right there pull up the data and display the data in various configurations. You can define various X and Y axes and have a very interactive way of displaying with the data. This is a substantial difference from what there was before. Before we brought in hub technology, the users of that network, what they could do is simply download the data, and then they used local tools on their local computers to inspect the data. And right now here, with the hub technology, these tools run very close to where the data is being stored. This does two things. First of all, the users don't need to download and install any tools. They don't need to download any data. So that saves a lot of transfer times. And the tools are running very close to where the data is stored, so that bandwidth there in between is very fast. This is just an example of a simulation tool, and I'm not going to say much about the simulation tools. That's how the hub technology grew up, with providing simulation tools, access to these simulation tools online. We have a number of simulation tools as well in the NIS network, but our biggest challenge right now is actually dealing with the data. Let me summarize, and again, lots of graphics got lost here on these slides. Let me summarize why the hub technology is so important for the NIS network. The data repository right now is one of the new things or one of the challenges that we're facing. So right now, Hub technology does not yet provide sort of an advanced data repository. The Cancer Care Engineering Hub, I think, is one of the first hubs who has added that element or has dealt with that element as well. The NIS network does so as well, and maybe at some point we can use that technology that we're developing here and feed that back into the Hub technology as well and make it even greater than it is today. Data tool co-location, I mentioned that. You know, we look at the data with tools that run close to where the data is being stored. And so you can run, if you want to use a fancy word, you can run in the NIS cloud right there without having to download any tools. So it's a download and install free environment. That's very important because I struggle a lot if I go on the internet and try to identify tools that would work for me, download them. I may have the wrong platform. It takes me a lot of time to even try out tools. Here on the Hub, I just go there and I run the tools in place in my web browser without any time to spend. The ability for the community to contribute, I think Mark mentioned that as well. This is a key element of the Hub technology as well. We are not just the IT team here at Purdue who's providing all the services and the tools, the simulators and the data for the community. The technology, the Hub technology helps the community or enables the community to contribute tools. So they are the ones adding new data browsers, for example, or new visualization tools or new simulators. That's very important. And last but not least, because we're here at Purdue and have the HUBzero team close, I think that's one of the keys to the success of the project. Mike mentioned that we have 30 hubs by now. Just having these groups around us, I think, is absolutely essential and helps us, develop this cyber infrastructure in a much faster pace than we would be able to otherwise. So that's all I can say in 7 minutes.
Thank you.
Do you host the simulations on the HUBzero servers, or are those hosted at the provider's location?
Yeah, that's a good question. We actually have a lot of different flexibility in the schemes that we use. So, for example, a typical hub, starter hub, can run on a single Dell server in our cluster. And that's assuming that you don't have too many users and the computational demands aren't too much. As it grows, as your community grows and more people are launching more tools, you might have a freshman class where 300 students fire up the same tool all at the same time. You can distribute out extra nodes just for the hub itself. And as your tools get more complicated, like you start running 200 node simulations that run for 4 hours, like the one that I showed, then at that point, you probably want those computations to be sent off-site. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. You can send your computations off to Coates and Steele, local resources. You can send them off to the TeraGrid, to the Open Science Grid, and we're always looking for other grid mechanisms that we can include into the fold. So HUBzero as a platform gives you a lot of different options for how you want to manage those resources, whether you keep them running locally so that they turn around quickly, or whether you send them out onto the grid so that you can take advantage of free resources. And we give you a lot of opportunity to do that, and it's really up to each individual hub owner to decide what they want to do, whether they want to send those, all of their runs to Coates, or whether they want to go for a TeraGrid allocation or what. So as a platform, HUBzero gives you lots of choices.
Right, and that's actually pretty important. So initially, for example, for the NIS Hub, we're just running on a server that is in the same or on the same campus at least as all the HUBzero servers. But then when our users, and this is only about to ramp up when our users run large simulation runs, we want to connect it with these other resources that we've heard about of the OSG or the TeraGrid, and then do really large simulation runs there.
I have a question, Mike. Actually, I have two questions. The first one is, have contributions to the hubs been a part of tenure documents that you're aware of? Are we moving that way? And then the second question is, have any of the hubs explored doing a companion peer-reviewed journal within the hub, sort of an interactive journal as a new digital publishing model?
We had one of the younger faculty as part of the Cancer Care Engineering project actually won a national award from I believe it was NIH, It was a career award, and that's certainly going to help them be part of the, it's going to help for their tenure and promotion documents. So that's an indirect benefit. But in terms of citing it directly, other than the publications and the scientific work, I don't think it's cited directly.
So I do know of one example in our case of a young faculty member who was tenured at another institution, and we got a nice letter from the department head saying that his participation in NanoHub and contributions to it were highlighted in the promotion case, and I thought that made a big difference. So that's one example that I know of. In terms of electronic journals and publishing, not yet, but we have recently started discussions with 2 different journals about what we might do together. And one of the things we're looking at there is the idea that you might have a plot of data or graph in a paper. The easiest thing to do would be to provide an ability to click on the image and have it be live, rescale the axes, input your own data and plot it on top of it. That seems like it might be a useful service. If the subject of your paper is a simulation and you've only been able to show a few results, maybe you could link to the simulation tool and the reader of the paper could feed their own input parameters into it. So we're talking to some people. We'll see what happens.
So in the NanoHub, we're very much thinking about it. It will not happen tomorrow, but one thing that will happen, hopefully tomorrow, well, figure speaking, next in a few months perhaps, is that we have citable data volumes, and we want to make them Google Scholar discoverable. So then at least, if you go to Google Scholar, you try to look for, earthquake engineering, structural analysis of a steel frame. You will not only find publications, you will actually find the data volumes. The next step would then be to connect that somehow with the publication, like Mark was saying, so that if you see that graph in that publication, you could click on it, it would go to the data repository and maybe pull up some data, and you can manipulate it and do what-if scenarios, related to the paper.
Question for the first presenter. It sounds like interesting. You can really access, see how many times has been cited. So someone in the hub doing that, not the faculty, not the researchers doing that, or automatically just pop up?
Your question is about tracking citations? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, tagging. Yeah. Someone have to tag. Someone have to make counting those numbers.
Yeah, I wish we had a magic solution for that. In NanoHub, they've done the most work on that, and they basically have an army of grad students. So the army of grad students puts in alerts in Google Scholar, and every paper that comes along, the army reads and classifies and attaches to resources. We also have some mechanisms in HUBzero that help you crowdsource that. So if you don't have an army of grad students, at least you could have your community upload the information. So there's a way to upload citations into a hub. But of course, people are very busy, and unless they have nothing better to do, they don't often go off and start uploading citations into a hub. We haven't reached that yet. So I think number one, we have some work to do on the cyber infrastructure that we could try to make it even easier to upload your citations. Number two, maybe there's some automatic mechanisms that we can include. And then number three, relationships with the publisher down the line may help us do that as well. So far, no magic solution, although we do have a way, if you can get the data in, to track it. Last question? I guess we're right about on time. Thank you very much for coming.
Got one written down there.
Oh.
I have a question about, maybe Rudy will know it, or one of the more complex tools, how long does it take to bring it up in the hub?
I can answer it.
Probably Mike has a better statistics because he sees it across many hubs.
And the answer depends a lot on the tool. I've seen it go as fast as a few days when you've got a pretty good programmer and the tool is pretty much ready to go, or it's fairly simple in terms of the number of inputs and outputs in terms of the functionality. So I've seen it take just a few days. I've seen it take 6 months or a year. So I think there's a lot of variability depending on how complex your tool is and how experienced the programmer is. We routinely, though, have, for example, on a lot of these projects, NEAS and NanoHub for sure, we have undergrads that come during the summer, the SURF students, Summer Undergraduate Research Fellowships. We have maybe a dozen or 30 SURF students during the summer. They take a week-long training course, and usually a week or two after that, they've got their first tool online. So it's not uncommon for an undergrad student with a week of training to have a tool online in a couple of weeks.
Maybe a proof of that is also, I often like to cite what we did during the proposal phase when we proposed the NEAS project. Within a couple months, I'd say, we put on a prototype NEAS hub, and it had some 20 tools installed. So just the fact that it was possible to do this, I think gave us a big leg up.
Good. Well, once again, thank you very much for coming. Didn't mean to cut you off, Joe, but if you have further questions, please see any one of us or come visit HUBzero.org. Thank you.